Hello and welcome to For Your Journey. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Travis.
And today we're going to talk about altars.
So what Andrew means by we're going to be talking about altars, we're going to be talking about some misconceptions about altars or, different misunderstandings of altars. One of them that I hear a lot is saying like, well, Jesus didn't use an altar, so why would we use an altar? He talked to people in a field, why don't we do that? Why are we restricting ourselves? Or also that the altar divides the congregation. There's like the minister and then there's the congregation. Why would we have this big division there?
Yeah, and the structure of having the altar there can sometimes be seen as like, well, that's restrictive, and it's just sort of a tradition. The minister doesn't have the freedom to just kind of walk around or do some kind of more engaging type of visual, or to be able to walk around or have a PowerPoint or something like that.
Yeah.
Those can all be seen as limitations of what the altar is.
Right.
And then people kind of like, well, what's that for then? Why
Yeah,
do
it's
we
just a
have
piece
that?
of furniture at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I think to address some of those, misconceptions, I guess it really isn't a misconception to say Jesus didn't use an altar. That's true. He didn't. He didn't have like a formal time when he stood behind an altar and preached, but he did set himself apart when there was teaching. You can read like the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes.
Pretty much is like most famous preaching encounter.
It's in Matthew 5, the very beginning of chapter 5. It says, and seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, and then it goes into the Beatitudes, the blessed are statements. And I think it's interesting that it says, he went up on a mountain, and that signifies some revelatory authority. In the time, back in, biblical times, people were aware that God spoke when there was mountains involved.
Like the most famous
not like all the time, but like
the Ten Commandments.
Ten Commandments, like Moses went up in the mountain. Like
Right.
The mountain signifies like God's majesty. It signifies revelatory authority. Something divine, something with authority is about to be revealed. And like so, Jesus, as he went up in the mountain, also it serves a functional piece that he maybe just need to go up there so people could see him more, or maybe he could talk to a larger group. Yeah, there's no microphones.
Sanctuaries.
There's probably babies crying. There's probably birds squawking. There's probably all this stuff going on. Like he needed to get a message out.
Right.
So it says in that beginning of Matthew 5, he went up on the mountain, kind of showing this revelatory authority, and then he sat down. I think that's interesting to highlight too, because he's taking a posture of like a rabbi. He's saying this is going to be a teaching moment. I'm coming down and going into the posture that you're familiar being taught in.
And they see that because it says, then they come to
Then
him.
they came to him, and they're like, and then he talked to them. He didn't just start talking and wait. I think Jesus is saying something. We should go maybe hear what he's saying. Like, could have been too. I don't know. I wasn't there. But he goes up on the mountain, sets himself apart from like just the crowd, sets himself apart from like the normal day-to-day activity, and says something divine's about to happen.
Yeah. And that's kind of the way an altar can function, is then we have this sort of structure in which we know and expect, like this is a place where there's going to be that revelatory authority from God. So like a person is going to be positioned in a way in which we know God typically speaks to us, or a way in God normatively speaks to us.
Right. I think our catechism highlights that when it's talking about the divine service as an experience as a whole. In the 12th chapter of our catechism, this is Catechism 12.1.5, which is a lot of points. Divine service as an encounter with God. And in it, kind of the end of that, it's talking about that when the congregation experiences the mystery of an encounter between God and man at the altar, it's always new. And I think also something important to highlight about that statement, it's not like God and the man at the altar.
The man,
It's God and man as a whole at the altar.
Yeah, that there's this encounter in which God the divine comes and encounters human.
And at this altar is where like word and sacrament come together.
Right. So then when we think like, okay, the altar is divisive, it does sort of set apart. There is an element
makes a
of that,
distinction.
a distinction.
Yeah.
But it also is bringing together so many different elements. It's bringing together man and God. It's bringing together through sacrament and through word. And so then it's pulling together word and sacrament. Some churches may have those two elements separate. There might be a pulpit and a communion table. In the New Apostolic Church, we have those two things combined. So another thing bringing together.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting too.
To encounter the real presence of God. And you can say, well, I experienced the presence of God out in nature. Well, yeah, that's true. That can happen. God's the creator of that too, and he can talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere, through any means possible. But we know that something special is going to happen here. It's going to be different. It takes us out of the mundane, and it's supposed to be kind of a transcendent experience.
And so that's an important piece too. You said about like he created all of creation, but he also creates the altar. He is that altar as well. So when we say like, okay, Jesus doesn't use an altar,
right?
He ends up being the sacrifice,
right? Because in the Old Testament, like when in Exodus, he he instructs Moses to go build an altar, and those were more sacrificial altars in the Old Testament, and then like Christ becoming the ultimate sacrifice. Yeah, kind of is what your point.
Right, he becomes that altar.
Right.
That was a symbol in the past. Is now he is that in the future.
Right.
He's that for us every week.
Right.
So that also then has us think about the altar a little bit differently, making it a little bit more of a sacred space.
Right.
So when we talk about like, okay, we might think of that as, well, that's just a piece of furniture. We were talking about that earlier on. But it's not just a piece of furniture. It's the place that holds or kind of holds the earnings of Christ, and it's where God demonstrates and shows his acts of grace, and he speaks to us through that particular mode or that particular means, which makes it not just a platform with a piece of furniture or a block of wood, but it's a place where we encounter God.
Right, and I think this is for our individual and collective, spiritual journeys, because it helps add to our understanding of what it means to have reverence at this sacred place where sacred acts happen.
Yeah, and it changes everything about the way we think about the altar when we can see all of those pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us on our discussion today. If you have any suggested topics or questions to talk about, you can find us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you wanted to read more about altars, you can find an article in our recent Vision, the Summer Vision newsletter, and there's an article about ancient altars. It has some history there, shows some cool diagrams, and just goes into a little bit more, covering some of the further points that we talked about today. But
especially in relationship to Thanksgiving
coming up,
and understanding decorating the altar a little bit more. Also, for our college students, we are offering again this year a College Connections program, a cool way to stay connected to the church while you're in school. You can look for this banner on the nac-usa.org website and register by August 31st.
August 31st for our USA District college students.
And once again, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Travis.
And this has been For Your Journey.